So, welcome everyone to our August Arts, Health, and Research Masterclass. We are glad to have you here this evening, and we are so excited to have the opportunity to talk with Ashton Applewhite this evening, and we want to make sure that we say a thank you to AARP for their support so that we can offer these master classes free of charge. And we thank any of you that decided to make a contribution when you registered for this class this evening. We are here with Ashton Applewhite, who is the author of This Chair Rocks. I have my copy here, which I think I went through at least two highlighters as I read through it. She is, in addition to being the author of this amazing book, she is the co-founder of Old School Hub. She speaks widely at different venues, including the United Nations and the TED Mainstage. And is the forefront of the emerging movement to raise awareness on ageism. In 2022, the United Nations named Ashton one of the Healthy Aging 50, 50 leaders transforming the world to be a better place to grow older. So I am excited to have this conversation this evening, and I have lots of questions for her, but I know you probably do too. So I really want this to be a conversation for all of us this evening. So Ashton, I'm gonna just kind of start in the generic kind of question of tell us your story. How did you come to this work? What was it that inspired you to come to this stage of working against ageism and educating? And you need to unmute. Sorry.
I've never done this before. Just kidding. Sorry.
It's not a Zoom meeting until somebody says that.
Exactly. Yeah, I had a horrible thought that during the pandemic, that once we all came out of our Zoom boxes again, that we would be unable to say great idea without going. It's like mortifying reflex, but I've beaten it back. Yeah, I probably shouldn't lead with the fact that I came to this with no background at all. I'd never studied gerontology. I didn't have any professional affiliations. And though there is much to worry about the internet, especially as it is sort of getting more in shitified. Can I say shit if someone else says it in the middle of a word? I could never have gotten where I got without just starting to think out loud on a website. So I'm grateful for that. And I wish I had a dazzling, meet cute story about losing my job. That's how Maggie Kuhn, who started the Gray Panthers, she was forced out of her job by the Presbyterian Church at 65. And she's like, the hell with this. I've been self-employed for so long that I have probably been discriminated against, but not job-wise, but not realized it. But I looked in the mirror 20 years ago-ish in my mid-50s, went, oh, this getting old thing, it's happening to me. Imagine that. I think, we age slowly and I think it's a little bit ageism, like you don't want to think about getting older, but also it's just like, oh dang, here it's happening. And I realized that I was pretty apprehensive about it. So being nerdy, I'm not an academic, but I started learning about longevity, and I was inspired by my in-laws who were in their 80s at the time. They said, and they were booksellers, and they said, Ruth said, my mother-in-law, why don't you write about something people ask us all the time? So when are you going to retire? Which I bet one or two of you have heard said. So I started, the blog was originally called So When Are You Gonna Retire.com. And I started interviewing people over 80 who work. And learned in what in hindsight seems like minutes, it was probably months, it might even have been weeks, that everything I thought I knew about being what seemed like really old to me then, now I'm in my mid-70s, so it didn't seem so far off, was flat out wrong or way off base or just not too negative or just not nuanced enough. And I started looking at where all the negative messages came from and what purpose they served. And I hope for those of you who are able to read the book, I hope you have some answers, because that is the big question I set out to answer. I had a word cloud. Remember those, where the word that crops up most often is the biggest in a cloud of words. And ageism was there from the very beginning. I probably had heard the word, but not a lot. And I became obsessed with how bad. I mean, I when I started 20 years ago, you couldn't say, and I'm very, very careful about what I say and about my sources. I will not put any fact out here that is not backed up by solid science. And you'll either find a citation in the book, or I'll put it in the chat, or you can email me and I'll send it to you. You couldn't say ageism harms your health. And boy, does it. But I knew it filled us with fear. Uh-oh. I live in Brooklyn. Can you hear the music going by? I can. Okay, I like that. All right, please go faster. Sorry, I can close my windows. And so I started as a blog. I thought I will never have to write another book. I had written a book early 20 years before that about women who end their marriages, and that was really hard and horrible. So I was, I'll just tweet and blog and be a modern writer. But I ended up writing a book, and I'm very glad I did, about how ageism is embedded first and foremost between our ears, because if we don't deal with that piece of it, we don't get any further. And then how it's manifested out in the world and traps us and fills us with fears that are way out of proportion.
Yeah. It will give you comfort to know, when I started my position as it currently stands here at Encore, I had no background except choir experience either. I had no background in dementia care. I had no background in gerontology. So it can be done, right?
We are living evidence. We faked it till we maked it.
It can be done. So, as I was rereading through the book and kind of, looking at some of the themes that came out, I think one of the things that kept coming out was that anti-aging equals anti-living. That aging is a good thing, right? And
I would say aging is neutral. It's living, and there's things about living that are hard, and there are things. I mean, I'm really glad I'm alive.
Yeah.
But I read that aging is living from a woman named Margaret Gillette, who wrote a book called Age Wise. And when I read that, I was like, oh, that was a new idea. And there are things about aging that are really hard and that we don't look forward to. But my focus is on how the culture makes it harder than it ought to, and how by learning about those forces, we can have a better time of it. So, aging is living. And as I'm going on already, Marianne, I'll shut up.
No, not at all. They certainly didn't come here to listen to me talk.
I will add one more thing. I just never thought, of course, aging is living. And this I have been thinking more about in recent years. Aging is lifelong. I thought it was something sad that old people did.
Right.
But and we are aging from the minute we're born.
Yes, right? Because we start counting it from the hours, right? Sorry, somebody's asking me to
turn up your
volume. I can do that.
We have Galette. Oh, I'm a goddess already. That's thrilling. And I'm not being. Thank you. That is really thrilling to hear. I consider Margaret Gillette. I actually went up to her house in Brookline when I was really trying to find my way, because the whole workforce project wasn't very interesting and was very safe. And of course, she couldn't tell me what to do instead. But she was kind, and we have been in close contact ever since.
Wonderful. So, speaking of that kind of aging, since the moment we're born, we start counting it. We count it in minutes and hours and months and years, right? And I found really entertaining the friend you had that had the aging party.
Oh yeah.
Instead of a birthday party, but really celebrating the fact that
I'm
that,
getting older.
she's aging. Why not celebrate?
Yeah, yeah. It's,
You know,
I mean, I think
I
that's
received
something.
my first AARP magazine in the mail
Yeah, yeah.
last week. So, it was just an interesting way to think of that.
Yeah, and when we are less afraid or don't make, ageist jokes about senior moments or whatever, we are setting an example for our younger friends. And that's really important.
Um, I also found it. Oh, here we go. Helene has a question. Do you think that our Western capitalist society makes aging a liability? More
We,
traditional societies seem to value old people much more.
I can't tell you how happy it makes me to see the C word, capitalism, come up so early in this evening because I always raise it, but I don't want to seem like, being polemic or, um, you know, uh, like I'm shouting at anyone. 100%, 1,000%. Uh, that because no one makes money off satisfaction. And when aging is either problematized, like wrinkles, no one ever died of wrinkles. But if we are persuaded that wrinkles are a terrible problem, and they are in a certain narrow sense, especially newsflash, aging is gendered, and women, if you cannot get hired because you have wrinkles, then it is a real problem, but it's a problem that's manufactured by the beauty industry.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and likewise, and this is tricky, when aging is pathologized, medicalized, turned into, and we see this happening, it's always complicated, it's always two-sided around menopause and perimenopause. I don't think my mother ever mentioned the word menopause. I don't recall talking about it to my daughter, who's now 42. It is fantastic that the silence has been broken because it is a double taboo, right? You are getting older and you are no longer fertile. And another thing that capitalism does is yoke women to our reproductive value.
Mm-hmm.
And we see a lot of that in the current administration's emphasis on have kids, because that is something only women can do. And it is a way, okay, I'm going to put the P word in, patriarchy. Under patriarchy, that is how we prove our value in a traditional sense. So, and, under capitalism, if we can be persuaded that every physical change is possibly the sign of a disease, something that needs to be treated. And sometimes it is. I am not judging anyone for having facelifts. I am not judging anyone for doing whatever they do to address perimenopause or menopause, but that makes money. And in that sense, yes, capitalism is a huge, huge factor. And it is a reason why age bias, as you surmise, sorry, I didn't see your name in the chat, went down, but pretend I remembered your name, please. Why your question is so sharp and so important to raise early in this discussion, and why it is worse in the West because it is a hyper capitalist society, and also in the US because Hollywood, and we live in a very youth centric culture.
Yes. Yes, you mention in the book the which you can find on Netflix now, the sitcom called Younger with Sutton Foster. And if you have not seen that, it is hilarious. The episode with the frozen shoulder is the best ever. She is a 40-something woman trying to pass as a 20-something in the workforce, and it is absolutely hilarious. And so, thinking of that, along those same lines, I know Marjorie, she said the Japanese culture celebrates people over 80 as treasures. How did we miss the boat?
I read somewhere that the word in Chinese word, I believe, for frozen shoulder is 50-year-old shoulder. And I went through that. Yeah, it hurts like hell. I'm typing the name of a fantastic beauty culture critic named Jessica DeFino, who really breaks down how the beauty industry profits from our fears. And it
Mm.
helps me think about, I could care less about beauty culture, but she's really, really incisive about the larger factors at work. Yeah, why, how did we get it so wrong? Capitalism. I mean, that is, if I had to put it on one word, it really would be that. Also, extreme youth centricity, Hollywood, and um, the beauty industry, the entertainment industry at large. Although there are more shows now with older people, older women, so we're starting to, flex our purchasing power and all of that. But people often, say, typically like looking wistfully eastward, isn't it better somewhere else? Meaning, I think typically Eastern cultures, and anywhere that that aging has been commercialized, anywhere the anti-aging message has reached, it's there. The very first country to buy translation rights to my book was Korea, which has a huge plastic surgery industry. Again, no judgment against people who have plastic surgery. Those pressures are fierce. But they in some Eastern regions, countries, where there's Confucianism, there is very much a tradition of filial piety, honor your elders. It's more present in African American society. It's way more present, and I'm hugely generalizing here. Obviously, I'm not Black. I'm not an Indigenous American. So if you want to learn really more about that, you need to hire someone who is a member of those communities and knows a lot more than I do. But of older people being called elders and treated with more respect. The one point I do want to make, though, and sometimes people are unhappy to hear this, but a culture where people are revered because of their age or put on a pedestal are often not great cultures in which to be young. I think about, what's the word, where all the money goes to the firstborn kid, or typically the firstborn son, or you have to wait for the old people to die off to get anything. I would like a society where no one gets put on a pedestal because of their age, not a young person and not an old person. I might like my teeny weeny pedestal to be closer to the fire, or maybe not be a pedestal at all, since I have trouble now climbing up on things without falling off them. So I do think that there are privileges that accompany getting older, mainly to do with helping us through. Someone said, please turn up. She couldn't hear that well. I'm deaf in one ear. So I do want accommodations because of my age, but I think it's important not to hold up. And we have absolutely lost stuff. I mean, in early America, colonial America, older people had all the power. They were revered, and think about, I love this point. If you read it in the book, I was totally like, I was constantly going, holy shit, I never thought of that. The fashions of the day: white wigs and stiff frock coats, and fashions that expose the lower leg, one part of your body that doesn't change very much as we get older, right? Fashions that flattered the older body. And that has obviously changed to fashion standards that are a little more punishing if we hold the ideal that the younger body is better or perfect, which is hard to get rid of in a culture that barrages us with images of skinny young people morning, noon, and night. So is there loss? Yes. Do we need to work towards a culture where older people are valued? 100%. But let's not idolize cultures where older people are, put on a pedestal.
Yeah. And Joe makes a good point in the chat. It's worth noting that casting aspersions on younger folks based on stereotypes is also ageism.
100%, 100% ageism. We are being ageist anytime we make an assumption on the basis of age about a person or a group of people. And you're too old, we hear an awful lot more than you're too young. But that's ageism too. And I'm sure you all have caught some of the horrible boomer bashing, or at least, especially recently around gerontocracy. I'm happy to talk about that. But anytime one generation disses another, and I'm happy to talk about why I don't even like the word generation much, um, it comes back to bite us. It's just not a good way to, to think about what's happening in society. And yeah, it's really look at what's actually going on with that person or that group besides how old they happen to be.
Yeah. So somebody mentioned, just if you haven't read the book, which of course you are more than welcome to be here. That was not a prerequisite for engaging, but just to talk a little bit about how the book is formatted. Going through things like identity, the brain, the body, intimacy, work, independence, end of life, and beyond are the chapters. How did you come about organizing things that way? Was it kind of an organic way, or did you have
Very
an
professional.
idea?
Oh gosh. You know, Writing a book is really the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I don't know I don't know how people write books every year, especially like really solidly researched nonfiction. I just will say, and please nod in agreement, Marianne, I'll send you money afterwards. That it's really dense, but it is fun to read. It is a lively book, I swear to God. Um, I was supposed to go away for a week, and my plans changed, and I had a week to myself with no engagements. And I happened to be in at my best friend's house. She had a big dining table. She was away. And I don't know how people organize everything on a little tiny screen either. I had pads and post-its, and I made a note of every smart idea I had had or had come across in the previous decade, and I put them all over her dining. I'm not recommending this, by the way. I'm sure there are lots better ways to do this, but I put them all out, and I started to organize them according to theme. And by the end, and I will tell you, I worked all day every day, and it was, writing is tiring. And then when I came back to New York, I wrote all day, not all day every day because my brain would have melted, but I really just forced myself through. I started with 11 piles of paper, 11 chapters, and then that boiled down to 9. I realized there was overlap. And I came back to New York with 11 stacks. And then in New York, I did what I called the digital dump. I turned all that, some of it was printed, some of it was blog posts, some of it was just scribbles on post-its, into a single digital document that contained all the ideas. And then I went through it again and made sure, wrote so that the ideas connected and flowed into each other. And then I did it again so that it actually read good. And then I stopped and took a break. And then I hired several editors sequentially to work with me and give me a little perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Thinking about kind of those chapters, um, or just the book in general, as you put things together, was there anything that surprised you?
That's a great question, and a question I often ask people. I don't think so because I don't like writing. I find it really hard, but I like thinking, and I really distilled it down into ideas that seemed worth putting in the book. And by then I was so familiar with them that I wasn't surprised. I I would say, I think in my mind, I don't know that what is the most important chapter. I mean, there's important ideas in all of them. I mean, the part on internalized ageism is, as I mentioned, a critical starting point. But I think the chapter I called the independence trap
Mm,
is a really important idea that doesn't get talked about much, which is, and we're back to capitalism.
yeah.
Um, you know, capitalism likes everyone to live in their own houses and buy their own washing machines and compete for jobs and be independent, right? Because then you are a better consumer, and then you have less solidarity also. So you tend to not see issues as things we could and perhaps should come together across difference to address. And one way this is manifest in our culture is the way there's so much discourse around independent aging.
Mm-hmm.
And I I don't, we are interdependent from birth to death. We all, God knows, we need help as children. You need help if you have children. You need help if you are a teacher. You need help if you are looking after someone else's children. So I think it's a myth to say that we are ever independent. And back to what's different in the West and more pernicious is this very deeply American hero. It's somewhat gendered, but the cowboy, the go it alone, the we're going to do it our own way, that we don't need any help from the government or anyone else. That is a deeply American ethos. And I don't happen to think it's our friend at any stage of life. It is certainly not our friend as we go through life and need more help with things. And I love the quote in the book from a Dutch gerontologist named Jan Bars: autonomy requires collaborators. If we want to have the late life and the end of life that we think we want, we are going to need to enlist people to help us arrive at it, right? And so I would like the word independent just taken out of any time it appears in front of aging and have it be interdependent. And I see all sorts of really good trends in society towards co-housing and towards the importance of community in hard times and in dangerous times that I think are helping bring that idea forward in lots of contexts.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. I know. My dad was in HR for a long time, and he used to ask, "Tell me one time you actually did anything completely and totally by yourself."
Yeah, I mean, when you go into the, grocery store and buy, think of where all the ingredients come from and who grew it and who packaged it and who sold it to you. And even more, I mean, in a cool way, but also a kind of terrifying way. How, all this global trade and, no economic or political decision is made in a vacuum anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Paula brings up continuing care retirement communities are also a part of this capitalism, especially being funneled to them out of fear, right?
Yes, and the takeover of long-term care and some CCRCs by private equity, which then strips them, staffs them at a minimum and sucks out every bit of profit they can, and then the care the care people don't get cared for the way we deserve.
Yeah, yeah. Francine asked, oops, hang on. Francine, I got to get back to it. It just
Thank you for managing the chat.
Yep. There's a lot going on in here.
I'm so happy. Yes, I'm looking at it, but I'm glad. It's very hard to read it and pay attention, yes. And I promise I'm paying close attention.
Yeah. Francine asked, is there any change in the ad industry to move away from simply working with young people?
That's interesting that you say that. I put a link in the chat at the very beginning to the Old School Hub. And Marianne, do you send out a follow-up email, or I'll send
yes.
you? Yeah. I started Old School in 2018. I make $0 from it with two people. And we started out as only a library of my thought was, the anti-ageism movement is young. Imagine if the women's movement had this repository, if you could find all the best resources in one place, right? All the best books and people. So let's do that. And at that time, you could find everything about ageism on the internet. And so it has since grown. And I'll make a plug for a separate Old School offering in a minute. But there is a library. And if you look under advertising there, you will see a couple of resources. There are people in advertising and tech are always brought up as the most ageist fields.
Mm.
And there are some agencies, I think it's probably not news to anyone that some agencies, modeling agencies, are using more gray haired models. There are agencies of creatives, all of whom are older, who are pitching that. So there is awareness of ageism in the industry, and some people are speaking out about it, but it's still pretty ageist, and which is nuts when you think of, I mean, it's all nuts. No prejudice makes sense. But
Mhm.
if you think about the purchasing power of older people, older women in particular, that they don't even want to sell us stuff is really kind of insulting.
Well, and you talk about in the book how it also doesn't make any sense because many times older generations have more money to spend or have the ability, to do
Yeah,
that. Whereas, I'm
much
thinking
more
of,
disposable income. And women
yeah.
make, I forget the exact figure, so don't quote me, like two-thirds, three-quarters of decisions about what to spend in the home. Can I just make a probably futile but language plug here about generations? You just said, like everyone else in the world except me, older generations have more money. When we hear the word generation, we think
Mm.
of a bunch of people born around the same time that share characteristics, right? I would love people to try and say older people, younger people,
Mhm.
instead of generations. We are so reliant on that word. For lots of demographers love them, marketers love generations. We want to know those, 9 obnoxious traits of boomers, or 6 annoying things Zoomers do. We all click on it, but they stereotype. I mean, it's clearly absurd to think that the millions of people born around the same time, yes, we have cultural reference points in common, but we're so diverse, and it
Mm.
leads to us versus them framing, and this idea that age differences are so huge and pit us against each other. So just get an age group, you know, older,
Well, and
younger.
even in the book, you talk about olders and youngers.
Yeah, yeah.
And I know we've talked at Encore very much about our official LLC IRS title is Encore Creativity for Older Adults.
Uh-huh.
And I know many of the singers that I have worked with said, we don't need to be reminded of that. You can just call us Encore Creativity.
It's complicated because one reason people don't want to be identified is that with that is our own internalized ageism. I'm not old, right? And ideally, we would be happy to identify as older. Older is easier than old, especially if, like, there's pretty obviously more road behind me than ahead. Uh, but sometimes it is complicated because sometimes you do want older people, but even just adult, like, why do we need, sorry, it's complicated. I mean, but if there is an age limit, which is of course ageist, but also sometimes, something you got to do, especially to fulfill bureaucratic or legal requirements.
Yes, we've often also talked about because AARP has been such a partner from the beginning. That that was what kind of set this. We serve folks 55 and older. Now it's 50 at AARP. So should we change our number?
Yeah.
And we've often had people come and say, "Well, I'm not 55 yet, but can I come and sing with you?"
Yeah.
And we always say, we never ask you for an ID. We don't ask you for your birth date when you register. It's kind of the honor system here. So, if you're okay,
We won't ask. That's don't ask,
then,
don't tell.
don't ask, don't tell, right? um, but we do have to be careful because a lot of our funding is specifically given for a certain age group. So
Yeah.
we can't just open the floodgates and have everybody.
Well,
But it's also hard.
If you have AARP's ear, it would be fantastic if they did something to explicitly challenge ageism.
Mm.
They have made some good videos, but they don't write about it in their magazine. They don't support Ageism Awareness Day yet. So they could have a tremendous, tremendous. I know that they steer clear of political stuff, but to say ageism is bad for us doesn't seem to me to be going out on a political limb. And they could really play a far more influential and important role than they have chosen to so far.
Yeah.
But they brought us here tonight, so why am I carping?
Deborah asked, you wrote your book pre-pandemic and pre the current administration. Can you talk about what has changed and how we can best support the anti-ageist cause in today's climate?
That's a great question. One of the things we heard a lot about in the pandemic was how ageism has gotten so much worse. And I just want to mention, I'll put also a link in the chat, or perhaps you can, Marianne. My main website is thischairrocks.com, and thischairrocks.com/blog is where I have been thinking out loud all these years. And if you search for pandemic or the word I'm about to bring up, which is ableism, you will see my writing in greater depth in this subject. As we know, the older people died in huge numbers during the pandemic. And part of that is simply because our age made us more physically vulnerable to COVID. And that is unchangeable and just a fact of life. The fact that older people died in the numbers that we did was not bias, biology. It was bias. And that made, in answer to your question, a lot, we didn't, and, it's because older people were less valued. It's because we don't pay caregivers enough. It's because caregivers tend to be women of color who have had to run a different job. It's always run many different jobs and couldn't afford to stay home, and so on and so on. It's always a complicated network of cause and effect and of systems in play. But people said, oh, ageism, it's gotten so bad. I don't think that's the case. I think the pandemic shone a light on age bias and on the lack of concern, the lack of prioritization of the welfare of older Americans, in particular, those in nursing homes, in particular, those who could not afford, really the best kind of care, or to bring in someone from the outside, or to isolate themselves. So I think the fact that more people were talking about ageism, I think, is absolutely a sign of culture change. So does the growth of old school. That's another really evidence base. When we started, we had 200 resources in the library, and now, we've had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. We keep winnowing it to keep it up to date. But when I started, a lot of people said, what's ageism? And I don't hear that much anymore. So there is much more awareness, and you can't get anywhere without awareness. Most bias is unconscious, and you may or may not choose to confront it once you're aware of it. But if you don't even know it's out there, you're not going to do anything about that. So that is a big change that I feel very positive about. How you can best support the anti-ageist cause? Thank you for that question. There's a whole bunch of sort of nerdy, big scale answers at the end of the book, like, press to support that the Elder Justice Act get funded. AARP has been instrumental, their excellent legal department, in pushing forward proposing legislation called POADA, Protect Older Workers Against Discrimination Act, which would lower the burden of proof in age discrimination cases. And it has passed the Senate. It has bicameral support, blah, blah. So there are things we can do, each of us, on various scales. The back to old school, we host a open to anyone Wednesdays at 1:30. Let's talk about ageism meetup. So you can come to that and meet other people. It's free. It's a Zoom link. It's on the oldschool.info site under events. I will do a link for that too. I'm almost always there. So there you can meet people and get ideas. I would also just noodle around the old school site in general and see what other people are doing. We end every office hours with something that I think is really, really important. You can't start too late. You can't start too small. You can't screw it up. it's hard. Culture change is hard because it means defying norms. When someone says something about your age that makes you feel uncomfortable, even if you don't know why, it's really hard to say, what did you mean by that? And not just, oh, you look great for your age. Or, I was at a party with lots of young people, and a young woman had a nice conversation with me. And then she said, I admire you. And I knew it was a compliment, but I didn't it felt weird to me because I think she was, and I wish I had said, but then I talked about it at office hours and so it's really good if you have a question. I use it as a sounding board. Why did it make me feel weird? Because I think she was saying it's cool that you're out here, even, in the world in this way, even though you're much older than most of the people here. So if we don't say something, nothing changes. And if all you do, and it's not small, is start to think differently. If you just read the introduction to my book, which is a free download on Amazon, or there's so much stuff for free. Everything, did I forget the fact that everything on Old School, all the resources except the books are free. So even if all you do, and the all is ironic, is start to question the assumptions that you have, that we all have. We are all ageist. We have all internalized these messages, starting with children's books and Disney movies, and question, gee, why do I jump to that? Why did that make me feel strange? Why do I assume that someone's different from me in age makes them more or less likely to X or Y? That you will change who you are, and you will be different when you walk out your door. And I really believe this, and you will be different in your next conversation. And when more and more of us do that, we change the culture.
Mm-hmm. Jane asks, is anything being done in elementary schools, through high schools, colleges, things like that about stereotyping?
Love that question. One of the yes, not enough. I don't know if you know about the 100th day of school thing. Like when the 100th day of school falls sometime in the midwinter, and it used to be, and Old School, and also the two scholars at the University of Connecticut did a really good version of ways to celebrate 100th day of school in a way that is not dress up like an old person with a mini walker and a gray beard stuck on your face. I never did get around to ableism, but I will if you want me to, Marianne, just ask me. It used to be about the day about 100 and teaching kids about decimals. And, there's absolutely no reason for it not to be talking about, bring in some really old people to the classroom, or talk about centenarians. There's lots more living centenarians now, but how to observe that in a non-ageist way. That is just an elementary school thing. In New York, where I'm from, they got some real money, and then they got additional money, amazingly, to do a pilot program educating high schoolers about ageism. And I have been trying to get the curriculum to put it on Old School, because the whole idea is, let's put these ideas, make them available to the public for free, so we don't need to reinvent the wheel. But look for curricula. There are all sorts of different ways. Is there I would love ageism to be, part of social studies curriculum, but it is, it falls under the rubric of DEI initiatives, and we know how that's going lately.
And speaking of government, Helene asks, what's your take on the criticism of very old politicians in our government system right now?
Yeah. The word for that, which is not a neutral word, is gerontocracy. And I mean, early colonial America really was a gerontocracy. All the politicians were old. But as a really important point there, and this is true in 2026 as well, that most of them are white, most of them are men, and most of them are wealthy. And so it is that I wish it weren't that way. I wish they were far more racially diverse. I wish there were lots more women, and I wish they represented the ethnic and socioeconomic diversity of the country. So it's not a good thing that it looks like that. But the problem is not too many old people. It is systems that make, that reward, that require money to stay in power and, reward incumbency and so on and so on. I wrote an article about that, and I am going to put it in the thing, right, debunking it. It's this guy named Samuel Moyn, who's a professor at Yale, wrote a book about gerontocracy. But there have been, I cannot type and do this isn't a generational war. It's in the link. I co-wrote I'm an impact fellow at an organization called Co-Generate, which brings younger and older people together. And they said, why don't you co-write something with one of our younger fellows? And I said, great. It wasn't until literally we were putting our bylines together that we realized we were born exactly 50 years apart. And as you will see, she's incredibly sharp. The whole Dianne Feinstein thing is very interesting too. So there are the argument behind gerontocracy and more broadly is this horrible, toxic, totally flawed, utterly ageist notion that old people are hoarding wealth and hoarding opportunity and not making way for younger people. In the job market, that is a fallacy that has been debunked countless times. It's called the fallacy of the lump of labor, right? That there's not enough. And then we get around to capitalism and to scarcity and to the opposite of interdependence and the opposite of independence. There's not enough. And with jobs, the amount and nature of jobs is not fixed. Higher employment among older people correlates to higher employment with younger people, and on and on. The issue is not one about age. It is about class. It is not old versus young. It is the extremely rich, no matter where they happen to live or what age they happen to be, against the other 99%. So it's really, really important to reframe it. Start with my article. And email me. You can also find me on Instagram. I'm really easy to find, and I just sent someone a link of 6 other articles that make some of the same points, different ones, really well. About, Pelosi is stepping down. Dianne Feinstein, I wrote a blog post, thischairrocks.com/blog, blog about Feinstein. There are, you don't become a politician without a big ass ego, right? And no one wants to step down from, giving up power is really hard. And also there's a whole lot of people behind staff, right? And institutions that have a vested interest. They got someone into office. They don't want that person to leave because it gives them influence. God knows I wish Dianne Feinstein had stepped down. God knows I wish Ruth Bader Ginsburg had stepped down. We are bad at succession in this culture. And I think it's something we need to get better at systemically. If you have any ideas about how we can help put that idea out more broadly in the culture, because I think there is some legitimate resentment of older people who just want to keep going forever and act like we're never going to die, when the best thing we could do to preserve our legacy, it is to help mentor and bring younger people in and transition gradually and pass on what that's better for whatever organization you work for. It's something I'm engaged in with Old School. How do I make sure it's in good hands? And also how do I am starting to step back and do less stuff I don't want to do, but I want to make sure that they know. And I'm not, by the way, I'm not the boss of Old School. We run it. There's no hierarchy. I'm not the boss of anything, but I really want to set an example of that. And I think we do need to get better at that. But except for like tenure track positions in universities, it's very, very rare, actually, that younger and older people are competing for the same job. If there's only one job in town, the barista at Starbucks, then you better believe everyone's going to be competing for it. But again, that's not a too many old person problem or a selfish old person problem. Have more affordable housing, and older people, many of whom would love to downsize, would move out, or, it's never about age. And to pin it on old people, we make a really good scapegoat. And when times are scary, we look for scapegoats, and old people are convenient. And I will say, but AARP's legal department is fantastic and does a good job. And I'll stop talking now.
Well, you bring up that idea of work that, and you talk about this in the book, that people are working longer for many different reasons. Some of them have to for financial reasons. Some of them have to keep their insurance. Because really there's that gap until Medicare kicks in. Some because they still can and they still want to, and so it's just this whole shift in if society in general is living longer, then we have the opportunities, and living healthier in a broad sense. There's the opportunity to do these things longer, and so
and to adapt our structures. I mean, I don't know if the Stanford Longevity Center, Laura Carstensen, who just stepped back from running it, but she has this new map of life, she and her group of scholars there. And it's like, this old silo of, you work, you go to school, you work, you retire, you drop dead, is not relevant anymore. How do we adapt these and we haven't had, like, hardly anyone has the same job for the whole middle of their lives and so on. How do we adapt the notion of employment, security, and gradually passing on what we know? Wouldn't it be great to work for a while, or, figure out what to do, then step back if you have kids, or step back if you have to take care of somebody, and then step back in and not be penalized, and not have women be doubly penalized, etc. We need to figure out on a large social and economic scale how to do that better. And some very smart people are doing that, who know much more about, labor forces and economics than I do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Francie, let me get back to Francie asked, do you have a viewpoint regarding UN NGO community regarding aging?
I'm really embarrassed. I was just answering the question about, is the program statewide, and completely blanked out on your question, which is why I shouldn't pay any attention to the chat. But the answer is, I'm sorry, I'm only human. The program in New York is just New York City, just in Brooklyn. And I'm makes me mad because I keep trying to get my hands on the curriculum. But it's the New York City Department for the Aging, and that would be who to contact about it. And now ask your question again. I promise you have my full attention.
That is okay. Francie asked, do you have a viewpoint regarding the UN NGO community regarding aging?
They're really, really good, smart people. I'm only involved peripherally. There's, some of them I see when they come into town. It's very, very specialized community doing really complicated initiatives because there are so many players involved, which is wonderful. And I worked a lot with the World Health Organization, and I can't say enough about how smart and wonderful and dedicated they are, and how much they manage to do with so few resources. The biggest thing, the UN, it's not the Committee for the Aging, but their group on aging, working group on aging, has done is to make progress on a convention on the rights of older people. There is a UN convention on the rights of people with disabilities, and on the rights of women, and on the rights of children, although the US is not a signatory to that last one, because capitalism. I can't resist. I'll stop there on that one. But in my dreams, if we wouldn't need a convention on the rights of older people if the convention on the rights of disabilities had teeth, because the reason older people, just broadly, thank you for nodding before I even finish my sentence, because it's a really broad generalization and you can take me down very easily. But broadly speaking, as a category, we need more help because our senses work less well, because our bodies work less well. And if it were a fully accessible universe, and if healthcare And we haven't even talked about the caregiving crisis. If caregiving was valued and affordable, then we wouldn't need a special convention. I mean, although there are places in the world is big, and there are places where older people really do require physical protection from abuse. So maybe I'm talking through my hat, but I do think they're really smart people, and I have voiced disagreement in that community, and they have said yes, but the Convention on the Rights of Older People will do far more good. And of course, it's a blunt instrument. How could it fail to be? Policy always is. So I would say that is the most valuable thing. They are doing really important work, really good people. Sorry, that was a very long, complicated answer.
No, it's okay.
I know y'all are smart enough to follow me.
It's a complicated subject. It's a complicated subject. Frank says we can influence culture and society by not letting them define us, but how we value and what we believe about ourselves. Fear and limiting self-belief is a terrible thing to let cripple an individual.
100% agree. And that is where it starts, with the looking at your own attitudes towards age and aging, and a very I'm very literal way to start is just to listen for when you use or encounter the words old and young. How do you use them? I feel so young, right? I don't feel old. Have we all thought that? I certainly have. What does it really mean? You don't feel useless. You don't feel unattractive. You don't feel incompetent. Well, I don't know about y'all, but I felt all those things so horribly at age 13. And I have never felt as and I'm one thing I think age does bring to most of us, if we're lucky, is more confidence, right? More self-assurance. So the point being, of course, there are older people, especially living in an ageist culture, that don't feel that way, that aren't as lucky or as privileged as me. But that is because of their personality, their culture, their circumstance, their health, a million things, not because of how old they happen to be, because there are zillions of people always the same age, whether that age is 14 or 104, that feel differently, that can or cannot do that thing. So try to break the habit of using young or old to represent some negative or positive thing, and use the feeling or the emotion or the ability that you actually are referring to, because that disconnects it from this sort of overarching idea, which is almost always, that older is worse and younger is better, although age stereotypes can be benevolent too. The wise old person. There are a lot of older people who are wise, but some of them are idiots.
And you bring up in the book, and you've talked about this a little bit, the idea of universal design, right? And this kind of hits that intersection of ageism, ableism, things like that. And I'm a huge proponent of that coming out of the education field. There's a lot of talk about universal design in the classroom to make the classroom accessible for anyone who enters it. It doesn't matter who you are. Everyone should be able to access everything. And I know I even saw it in the retirement community that my parents moved to, which they were in the independent living portion of it. They had a condo. But bringing my mom groceries, I couldn't get into the front door because there was no power button to open the door. And that had nothing to do with my age. It had to do with the fact that I had a handful of groceries and I couldn't open the door. We shouldn't call it a handicap button. It's for moms with strollers. It's for, all these things. And I asked one time, I said, I don't understand. This is a 55 and older community. Why is there no power button for the door? Well, that's the independent living, and we don't want them to feel like they need that. And I said, but
also, we don't want them to be like, that's othering.
Right? And I'm thinking, well, I'm having trouble and it has nothing to do with my age. I just have an armful of groceries, or I've got my kids in a stroller, or,
People, and they don't want wheelchairs cluttering up the hallways. They don't want walkers in the dining room. And that is just an interesting way to think about universal design. Is the premise that anyone can open the door or a ramp, whatever, that it's necessary for some, but good for all. Like a ramp
Mhm.
is not inconvenient. A ramp or a lever door, it's good for everybody. And it's really, and that we stand in solidarity with people who really need it, who can't get in the door without it, when we do exactly what you did and say, what the heck? I want to define ableism for people, because it's not that word. It's a little confusing because some people say disableism.
Mm.
It is stigma and prejudice around how our minds and bodies work, as compared to ageism, which is the same around age. And a lot of what we think of as ageism is actually completely understandable apprehension about how our minds and bodies may end up working differently. And so it is a massive double stigma,
Mhm.
right? And it's really hard to get people past that. But, if I mean, and I write and think about this a lot. And if you go to my blog, thisdearrocks.com/blog, and enter ableism, you will see I've written about it a lot. I have a talk, and Old School offers a workshop, which you can hire my colleagues to give, or it's free. We put it up on the web for free, called Still Kicking, because the still is ableist. Oh, still walking, still driving, still working. And the kicking is ableist. About how these two prejudices intersect, how they're different. It's very different to age into some kind of incapacity versus being born with a disability. But how might we look at how people with disabilities celebrate interdependence? Because they have to. The government isn't helping them. They're much more integrated into society than they used to be. When in previous centuries, even decades, that was put in institutions, no matter whether you were cognitively, developmentally impaired or whatever. And mercifully, that is not happening anymore. But how can we learn from them? Most of the disability justice advocates are younger, and they could learn a thing or two from us, right, about adapting to change. And so there's enormous, I think, joyful possibilities for solidarity, but it's a big ask, because you have to get past what I scientifically call age cooties, and also then confront this additional, excuse me, very human fear of not being capable physically or cognitively anymore.
Absolutely. Um, Talk to us about the bull looks different.
I love that phrase. Excuse me. In my first or early years of doing this, I got invited on a journalism trip to Johns Hopkins and other places to look at aging. And a bioethicist named Tom Finucane, we listened to a short talk of his, and he said his motto was a Mexican saying that the appearance of the bull changes when you enter the ring. In other words, it looks different to the matador, right, than it does to the people in the bleachers. And he put it in this context of, in a society, and it relates a lot to ableism and physical capacity. It is human to look twice at someone who looks, like their body is different, or they're not all there mentally. We do that as animals, like we clock like what's different about them. But in a society where speed and physical prowess and cognitive prowess is so celebrated, there is profound stigma. We don't think about it, and we grossly underestimate the quality of life of people who cannot move fast and think fast and be young. And so we assume that their quality of life is worse than it is. It's why people in the disability justice community feel really strongly about assisted suicide. That is so complicated. We would need to have another whole evening to talk about that, Mary. But they feel like, and I do write about this in the book, that there is an assumption that if you are bedbound, or if you can't speak without assistance or whatever, your life is not worth living. And they beg to differ. and they ought to know, right? So they have a great group called Not Dead Yet. So the point being, sorry, long answer, but the bull looks different. We cannot know what any other human being is experiencing. In psychology, William James, Henry, the novelist's brother, was a pioneering psychologist, not psychiatrist, and he called it the psychologist's fallacy, that you can ever know what the person sitting across from you in the chair is going through, even if you've been talking to them every Wednesday for 20 years, right? And in a society that is full of fear and prejudice around aging, around having a disability, we make all kinds of negative assumptions about not just their quality of life, but their value as a human being. And it's really, really important to step back and question that.
Thank you. Um, what have you found to be, if you've been in this work, what have you found to be the most impactful piece?
Oh, geez. I don't know. I would say an idea that's it's become increasingly important to me. I already mentioned to frame aging as lifelong. I think that's really important. It's happening in gerontology now, life course studies,
Mm-hmm.
because if we would take better care of ourselves when we were young, if we understood that that has ramifications for how we're, I mean, it's hard when you're young. I started out saying it's hard to imagine getting old, but I mean, wouldn't it be great to have, preventive medicine be funded and valued and holistic care? So the fact that everyone is aging and that it is a journey we are all on, we're just at different stages in it, and that the difference in stage has, brings us together much more than the difference in age, right? Age, ironically, I want us to be more honest about age, but I also want us to give it less priority, right? It's to give it we give it more credit than it deserves for shaping who we are and what we're good at and what we're interested in and who it might be fun to hang out with. Another idea that I think is really important um, is that the longer we live, the more different from each other we become. There's this idea, that when people are like, when does old begin? I don't get that question anymore. But that ARP magazine is going to come through the chute and everything's going to go to hell, right? I'm old. My neighbors are going to see that I'm old. And it's just, you're then enter this gray zone of the elderly, sad, gray oldness with old people in residences, whatever. It's like deeply othering. And this idea, that the word elderly shouldn't be an ugly word, but it connotes frailty because of the ableist piece. What I really dislike about elderly is the that tends to be in front of it, because it suggests that older people are some homogenous mass. And in fact, we age at different rates, physically, cognitively, socially, developmentally. Every 17-year-old is very different from all the others, but they are way more alike in all those ways than 37-year-olds, who are way more homogenous physically, socially, developmentally than 67-year-olds, and so on out. So I think it's important to know that. We see it. We see it when we look around, look at, our high school reunions, right? People look less and less and less alike. And you see how so many factors, environment, the but genetics plays less of a role than most people think it does. Luck. I would like people to talk more about luck. It's back to independence and control. Oh, here's a really important idea. The only thing, and we want control, we want to be able to open the damn door to the end. And hopefully you can, but you may not be able to. But no matter how rich you are, even those, in my opinion, deluded tech guys who think they are going to live forever, let's not get into why that might not be so fun. But the only thing you can actually control about aging is your own attitude. And there is buckets and buckets and buckets of data go to my blog and search for Levy, Levy. Becca Levy has done the pioneering research on this, but now more people have joined her about how attitudes towards aging affect how your minds and bodies function at a cellular level. I think I told you this, Marianne, when we were chatting before the Zoom, not once it started, but I told you I'm very careful about my sources. I wanted to say ageism makes you sick because from the beginning, because it was clear to me it was corrosive and bad for us individually and collectively. You can now say for all sorts of inflammation, longevity, heart disease, stress, ageism harms our health. So it makes you sick. So by reading my book or reading other stuff on Old School for free, I don't really like pimping my stuff, and it's the only thing I pimp. By simply learning about aging, you become. ARP did a study about this in the 90s. The more you learn about aging, the less you fear it. Partly because we are so afraid of it, but just because it's really cool. It's really interesting, right? And if you can sort of lift this veil of assuming it's sad and icky, then you're off and running. I mean, that's what happened to me. And I think you too.
Yeah. Sheila shares, a friend of mine said to me when I was preparing to retire, whatever you need to do, do it now because when you retire, you won't have the time. And then Mark asks, what do you suggest to do if you apply for an opportunity, job, singing competition, but there is an age limit?
It's tough. It's really tough. I used to be much more smug about a lot of things, or much more certain of a lot of things. And one of the things I don't say anymore is that all age limits are wrong and dumb. Because a friend in her 50s had a cancer diagnosis, breast cancer, and there were a group, I guess, that was just for young people, young women. And she's like, "What's that about? Is that ageist?" And I'm like, "Hell yeah." Because what you share is that you have cancer and you want to share treatments and whatever. But I had just in time the wit to run it past two much younger friends of mine who were diagnosed with breast cancer in their 20s. And they said, not so fast. When, yes, it's helpful to hang out with people, learn from people who have your particular diagnosis or your doctor or you nearby, whatever. But when you are young and you have cancer, it is different from having had children, from having had more. If you don't even know if you're going to live long enough to get married or do XYZ, and being with other young people who shared that uncertainty was incredibly valuable. So I won't say that age limits are never okay, but most of the time they're not okay. But it's, but how to make that case, Frank, I am not sure. We had a good case for Marianne of like, we don't check your paperwork. Suppose you just suppose you just showed up. Takes courage to do that. Maybe you don't want to be that person. Maybe you want to set up a counter choir and sing better. How's that for a horrible, competitive, awful idea? But be creative and challenge how come, or couldn't we do one with dog lovers that all bring our dogs and be all ages, or sing this kind of music that needs more vocal range, or ways to be creative about it. I'm sorry you're up against that. It sucks.
Yeah. And you also talk in your book about the importance of having friends that are in different parts of their life, that the friendships should not be, don't discard somebody as a possible friend or companion simply because of their age, that it's important to have those relationships.
Right. You may not like them, but your odds are you won't like them because you don't want to do the same things or their politics or whatever, not because of the age gap. I would have early on, remember, I knew nothing. And if you had asked me what was the most important component in a good old age, I would have said health. But health is relative, right? We don't go from healthy to unhealthy. And plenty of people with chronic illnesses and chronic conditions enjoy their lives very much. Not health. And then I would have said wealth, not wealth. It's having a solid social network. And one of the best ways to do that is to join a choir.
Yay! Extra gold stars. We talk about that a lot at Encore, and we found that out during the pandemic when we couldn't sing. How much more we do than just the singing. And we have had folks meet in Encore and get married. We've had folks that I was at dinner with two people the other night who discovered they went to the same high school together and they didn't know it. We've got folks, we got an email from a group that actually disbanded, but there are three women from that group that continue to see each other because it wasn't just about the singing. They still go out to lunch and do all these other things together. So it certainly is more than that. Joe says, I am finding that an amazing number of older people avoid making friends who are even older than they are.
Because why? Do we know? Age cooties?
Joe, do you have anything to add to that? Feel free to unmute and tell us a little bit more. I find that interesting as well.
1934. I'm unmuting. No,
Hi, Joe.
I live in a retirement community that's 2,000 people, and
Wow.
when new people come in, I am finding that sometimes people will just kind of they gravitate towards the hot young freshmen. The people that are moving in at 70 instead of the people who are moving at 80 because they won't be around so long. My mother reported the same thing back in the 80s when she moved into a retirement community that people would avoid older people who moved in because they weren't going to be around long enough to,
Wow.
make it worth their while, which was just horrendous.
Yeah, I mean, it is the self-protective piece of it is icky but understandable. I mean, and one of the reasons and I'm pretty candid, as you can tell, to have friends of all ages is to ensure that a bunch of your friends are going to outlive you. And I mean, I don't think that's the main reason. And I suspect, Joe, that, internalized ageism and ableism, it's the same thing that, I don't want, you hear a lot about sort of mean girl stuff in senior living, like the people with, don't want the people with memory care or the people who were drooling. I heard a horrifying anecdote from spoke at a conference of people who do senior living, which is really important, righteous work. And most of the people who do it are amazing. But one guy's dad had a stroke and he couldn't eat without, a bib and some of the food falling out of his mouth. And the nursing home passed a regulation that you couldn't eat in the dining room if they put it sort of euphemistically, but if you had trouble getting the food to your mouth. And he said, it's pretty interesting. I can take my dad to any restaurant in town except the one he's paying $300,000 to live in. And people, they think it's contagious or, it makes them look old or look disabled, but, it's not, it's inhumane and it's deeply unkind. And it's also not super practical because suppose that's your best friend, suppose it becomes you. Do you really want to be, a lot of the how to age well discourse in this country is that we age well by appearing to not age, by spending massive amounts of money and energy on, for women, it's usually about continuing to look young, and men, it's about continuing to move, which just perpetuates its own set of icky gender stereotypes, but trying to move. And it is important to try to be active and to try to feel good about the way you move. But if the goal is to not, to stop the clock, it sets us up to fail. It compels us to spend all sorts of money on stuff that, doesn't work or fails us sooner or later. And of course, it's complicated. We all need to push back where we can and try and, I'm not athletic. I would love to just spend my life, reading on the sofa and having people bring me things. But but I try. My partner's like really active, and I try to move as much as I can because I know I'll be sorry if I don't down the line. But we each got to do this stuff in our own way. And God knows there are lots of, people who make it into their 90s and beyond who like live on gin and steak and never walk around the block. So life is unfair. The only thing we can control, I'm thinking of my dad. The only thing we can control again is our attitudes. And the best way to do that is to educate yourself about about how rich and diverse the experience is, in my opinion.
Thank you. So we've got just about 8-ish minutes, 7-ish minutes. Keep throwing questions in the chat, by the way. I'm keeping an eye on it. Ashton, what kind of advice would you give as like one thing that we could each do tomorrow to help with this?
It depends on you and what's available to you and what interests you. And I got a really good piece of advice when I was writing the book, or early on, luckily, from a woman who said, never use the word should. And I stuck to that. You could sit next to someone who's, in a wheelchair. You could reach out to a person. I mean, making a younger or older friend is in itself an anti-ageist act. You could even just this little thing, and zero judgment. We all do these things, but when at a party or a meeting or whatever, how many of us make a beeline for people our own age? Try to break that habit, right? And try and, make a different habit. If you are organizing a club, a social event, a reading group, a dinner party, is everyone the same age, right? Or for that matter, the same skin color or the same religion or whatever. It is awkward. It is hard. You are going to screw up. It is going to be awkward. But I do know from many, many awkward moments in my own past that if you are, it isn't to say intent always gets you off the hook, but if you are trying and not assuming, most people are really happy to be offered the option, the invitation. And it is only by, my friend group is very age diverse for a variety of reasons, but it's still pretty damn white. And I can't go grab, people of color and say, hi, be my friend, so I look less racist. I have to, think what do they do? What are they interested in? How might I find out more about that and support something that they do? But the same with age. Don't assume that age is a barrier to a meaningful friendship or just, just a whatever. Just doesn't have to be your new best friend. And be proactive in putting yourself in their company and seeing what happens.
Thank you so much. I'm just scrolling to make sure there are lots of thank yous in here, and I've seen lots of claps and hearts and things go by. If we can give one more kind of encore thank you to Ashton, thank you so much for your book, for your blog and your websites and the resources out there. We will make sure if you want to come back and check out those things when we post the video, underneath in the description of the video, we'll have links to all of these different places. Fantastic. Yeah, that Ashton has mentioned tonight. I've been keeping track of them so that we can have them and you can take your time to go visit them and see some of the great things. I would also, again, you can find Ashton on LinkedIn. You can find her on Instagram if you kind of want to follow things that she's working on and doing. It would be a great way to stay connected. So thank you so much for your time.
I will actually pimp one more thing. I just started a Substack called, probably won't surprise you, Things I Used to Say. And uh, and I will post the link for anyone who wants to follow me there and throw out things you think I should stop saying or start saying or whatever. It takes all of us. Thank you for hanging in. It was all this time.
Yes, thank you so much. And again, thank you to AARP for funding our monthly masterclasses. We will meet on the 29th of August for our artistic masterclass with Michael Polser to talk about vocal anatomy and how we can keep singing in a healthy way as our bodies are changing. So we hope that you'll join us for that. And thank you so much again, Ashton. It's been a pleasure this evening. Thank
Thanks so
you,
much.
everyone, for joining us. Have a wonderful evening.